So you always live with a sense of fear or foreboding, or you just give up.
Today we have a treat. We have a treat because I spent the night at are you my cousin-in-law?
Yeah,
I don't know what you are. We have
cousin
some kind of relation.
I don't know what it is.
But this is Mateen Elass, great guy. He actually grew up in Saudi Arabia with a Muslim father. Can you imagine that? And he was searching for answers. He didn't buy into Islam. And he ended up in India studying under a yogi, a guru.
Yeah.
And he didn't find the answers with Eastern mysticism. But the good thing is that he ended up actually at Stanford University. He got a degree in philosophy and psychology. And then later on went to England for a PhD in theology, correct?
New Testament studies.
New Testament studies. So a wealth of information, but he focused on Islam studies. And I just wanted to talk to him a little bit because a lot of us don't know enough about what's behind the curtain of Islam, and especially for the Italian audience, a lot of them really don't know much about Islam, period. And I think that I wanted to have a little chat with him to kind of have a broad view of what are we looking at, because many people always hear Islam, that is a religion of peace, right?
Yes.
Is it a religion of peace?
Well, Islam is not a religion of peace. The reason Muslims can say that with some degree of integrity is that what they tend to mean is that if you're within the fold of Islam, then you're at peace with God. He's not your enemy any longer. But if you're outside of Islam, you're still at war with God.
Okay.
In fact, Islam actually names the two camps. If you're in Islam, you're called a member of Dar al-Islam, the house of Islam. If you're outside of Islam, you're in the camp that's called Dar al-Harb, which means the house of war. So there's no peace between Islam and those who are outside of Islam, unless you convert and come into Islam.
Aren't Jews supposed to be pigs? Don't they identify the Jews as pigs and Christians
pigs and monkeys? Pigs and monkeys.
Yeah.
That comes out of the Quran. There are 3 passages in the Quran that use the terms pigs or monkeys. That one of the punishments that Allah put on the Jews who disobeyed Him was that He turned them into monkeys, and so that's why today Muslims sometimes refer to Jews as the offspring of monkeys.
And what about Christian? Do they have also some kind of identification with?
Well, Christians are also seen as those who have perverted or changed the words of God, but they're the worst epithets are reserved for Jews. Christians get off a little easier, but they're still not treated well in the Quran.
And we were talking yesterday a little bit about the figure of Muhammad, the fact that, I mean, the guy was not somebody to emulate, according to our standard, yet people in Islam think he was a representation of God, right? So if you have some of the details.
Yeah, not a representation of God, but that he's considered to be the perfect example of what a human being should be. There are 2 passages in the Quran where Muhammad is called an excellent example for the human race. So Muslims believe that it's their responsibility to try to live the same way that Muhammad lived as much as they can.
Okay. Tell me a little more about Muhammad. Who was he? I mean, the fact that he married a 9-year-old girl and then had other 11 wives. I mean, what can you depict?
Yeah, Muhammad's moral example is not something that Westerners would want to follow. He married his first wife, who was 15 years older than he, and she was a wealthy widow already. And when he married her, he became sort of like a kept man. He had now resources, so he didn't have to work. He could go off to the mountains and meditate and so on. And he remained monogamous while he was married to her. She passed away in 619, according to Islamic teaching. And then Muhammad started marrying multiple wives after she had passed away. The wife that he married, who was 9 years old when he consummated his relationship with her sexually.
Unbelievable, even to think about it.
Her name Aisha, and he actually was betrothed to her, engaged to her when she was 6. But 3 years later, she became his wife. And he was at that time 54 years old, and she was 9 years old.
Unbelievable.
Crazy.
Grandpa.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah, and as we were talking about,
Yeah.
because Muslims say he's the perfect example,
Mm-hmm.
many Muslim men think that it's right for them, if it's legal in their country, to find a 9-year-old bride or a very young bride to
Mhm.
marry, because that's what the Prophet did, so that's what they should do.
So then, when typically when you're talking to Muslim as a Christian, they always say, "Well, we have the same God because Abraham is our father as he is your descendant. I mean, we descend from
yeah.
father as Abraham as the father figure." What's wrong with that picture? Is that correct? Incorrect?
Well, it's hard to tell genealogically
Mm-hmm.
whether Arabs like Muhammad himself actually descended from Ishmael. So that's a big question up in the air. For Muslims, there's no question. They say, yeah, that's what happened. But it's hard to trace genealogy. There's not much physical history to be able to grasp onto. But the bigger question is, did the religion of Abraham fit with the context of the religion of Muhammad,
Mm-hmm.
as it does with the religion of the Jews subsequent to Muhammad and the religion of Christians?
Mm-hmm.
In the New Testament, we see Paul saying that those who are in Christ, who have faith in Christ, are exhibiting the faith of Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
So we are spiritually offspring of Abraham.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at Islam, the religion itself teaches something vastly different about who God is
Mm-hmm.
from the God of the Bible. So anyone can claim to be an offspring of Abraham, but the proof is in the pudding. And the religion of Islam is so contrary to the religion that's found in the Bible that I'd say it's a misunderstanding to say that Islam is an Abrahamic religion.
Mm-hmm. Because we emphasize that personal, intimate relationship with the Father through Christ. And I remember having talks one time with a taxi driver, that was Muslim, and what I got from him was a concept of a God to be feared, period.
Yeah, a God to be feared and a God who can never be known,
Mm-hmm.
because he is so superior and so withdrawn from this world. What he has done is to give his will to declare how human beings have to live. So the Quran is not a book about how to develop a relationship with God. It's a book about what God commands human beings to do.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when you read the Bible, you see it's a story of how God comes to his people, how he chooses his people, brings them to him, and draws them into a relationship with himself.
By giving himself.
By giving himself, and obviously most fully in Jesus, when Jesus comes into this world.
Exactly. So would you say that then is pretty much a religion of duties? Is that how they find the right graces with God?
Mhm.
By performing?
It's a religion of works, there's no question about it. And the assumption is that if you are a Muslim, if you've made your profession of faith and you're trying to keep these commands of God, then you hope that God will grade on a curve, and that you meet the minimum standard at least, so that you can get into heaven. But like with all religions of works, you have no assurance that you've actually made the grade. So you always live with a sense of fear or foreboding, or you just give up. You say, I know that I haven't kept the laws that God's commanded me to keep. Like, for instance, as we talked about yesterday, that Islam, Allah commands that Muslims pray 5 times a day. It's mandatory. You can't skip any of the prayers. But if you find you get to be friends with a Muslim and you ask them, do you keep all 5 daily prayers? Have you done that every day for all of your life since you became a Muslim? Most, if they're honest, will say, no, I haven't. But
So
we
that
hope that
disqualifies them then?
Well, they hope that God will show them mercy.
Okay.
The Quran speaks about a God who is merciful. Every one of the chapters of the Quran, except for one, begins with the Bismillah, in the name of Allah, the merciful, the beneficent, the merciful. And so Muslims know that that's a character quality that God can exhibit, but they have no certainty that God will exhibit that mercy towards them.
Yeah. Exactly. What about, you were talking about something else that was interesting. You were saying that there isn't much, historically speaking, there is not much evidence of Muhammad. You're mentioning that at the Dome of the Rock in 691 there were some references, but there is nothing between 632.
When Muhammad is supposed to have died.
Exactly. So you have about 60 years of silence, which is kind of strange, don't you think?
Very much so. And in the case of, as we were talking about, in the case of Jesus and his death and resurrection, you have a community that forms and immediately is talking about him, but also you understand that community is a tiny minority within the Roman Empire. They have no power.
Sure.
On the other hand, when Muhammad dies, within 2 years, by 634, the Arab armies are breaking through the Arabian Peninsula out into the land that we know as the Holy Land, and then across the Sinai into Egypt and across northern Africa, and then east across what we now know as Iraq and Iran and Pakistan and Afghanistan and so on. And they conquered. They became the rulers. So unlike the Christians, who were the minority party with the huge Roman Empire over them, keeping them kind of bottled up, the Arabs were the ones who were in charge. So when you look at the documents and the historical artifacts of that time period from 632 up until 691, and you look at the manufacture or printing of coins, you look at inscriptions on buildings or now ruins of buildings, look at official documents, what you find is that there is no mention in any of those of a prophet named Muhammad. There's no mention of a holy book known as the Quran. In Islamic history, the first 4 caliphs or representatives running the Muslim empire after Muhammad's death they're known in Islam as the rightly guided caliphs. There is no document existing in history of that time period which actually mentions any of those individuals by name. And these, of course, these are the ruling authorities, so they would get to say whatever they want to say. So it's so highly suspicious that in 60 years after the death of the most prominent figure in Islam, that there's no mention of him until you get to this the building of the Dome of the Rock, and then you start to see some inscriptions.
And what about the Quran itself?
The Quran itself, I mean, the Muslim party line is that the Quran, of course, the revelation stopped with the death of Muhammad, and then all of the revelations that had come through him are gathered over the next 20 years and are finally put into a final book form in 652 AD, 20 years after Muhammad's death. We have no actual record of any of those manuscripts. All we have are reports from 200 years later, histories that say that 200 years earlier,
so
this
so
happened.
sad.
Yeah. The first actual Quran, existing Quran, that we have documented is at least 100 years after the death of Muhammad, and those are partial Qurans, segments. And there's so much when you look at the transmission of the Quran and how it came to be in its final form today. There's so many things that are up for grabs. It beggars belief that a person could say, as Muslims do, that the Quran that was gathered by Uthman and the Caliph Uthman in 652 was the Quran in its final form, and it's never changed from that point up until today. The Quran we read today, word for word, is that Quran. There's no way that is actually possible. We've got so many variants, so many contrasts, and that's not the right word, not contrasts, but so many difficulties, because as we were talking about yesterday, Arabic is a Semitic language that's capable of so many different meanings depending on vowels and diacritical marks and so on. And the first Qurans that we have, the earliest Qurans we have, were written without any diacritical marks or without any vowels. So it's sort of like a crapshoot, having to put in the right markers to figure out what that
Yeah.
word actually is.
And yet they are the very ones that are criticizing the Bible, saying, "Oh, the Bible has
Corrupted.
changed so many times over the years because
Yeah.
of corruption and so on and
Yeah.
so forth."
Yeah.
Does the regular Muslim understand what you just expressed right now?
About
They've
the
been
Quran?
bothered, to go and research. Wait a minute. Before I criticize the Bible, did the same concept, apply to what I'm reading? Do they even go
No,
there?
no, it's forbidden territory. I mean, something most Muslims would never even come up in their minds because they've been taught from from their mother's
Not
milk,
to question.
not to question, and they've been taught that the Quran is God's preserved word, perfectly preserved. Allah, I mean, it's part of the rationale for why Islam even exists. Because if Christianity and Judaism had been rightly preserved, according to the Muslim idea, there'd be no need for Muhammad. Because he comes along as the reformer who says, well, the Christians and the Jews both got it wrong. They perverted the words that God had given them. So now God is giving his word again to Muhammad in a way that can't be perverted. So they have to believe that the Quran is the literal preserved words of Allah. And if that crumbles, then really Islam crumbles.
As a Christian, you know that you are asked to love your enemy, right? I mean, that should be our final goal in a sense. When we see adversities. Yet with the Quran, you almost see an opposite thing. If you don't submit, I have the right to take you out. Isn't that part of their belief?
Yes,
Do they justify killing of others if they don't submit to Allah?
Absolutely. I mean, that is the key idea behind the whole concept of jihad in the Quran. There are over 100 passages in the Quran that deal with jihad and with killing. There's another word that isn't used, I mean, we don't hear it in the media very much. It's the word, Arabic word qatala, or the noun qital, which means to be in armed combat with the intention of killing someone else. Either you force them to surrender or you kill them. And these passages they're sprinkled throughout the Quran. The Quran's about the size of the New Testament in length, but you have over 109 references to jihad, and I can't remember exactly, but 250 some references to qital, to killing. And there's a passage in the Quran, one of the key passages, in the 9th surah, 111th verse, where God says to the followers of Muhammad, I'm making a bargain with you. I will give you paradise if you will surrender yourself to me, so that I own you and everything that you possess, and you will engage in fighting in my cause, in the cause of Allah, killing and being killed. And if you do that, I will guarantee you paradise. This is a sure promise, Allah says, from me. And so Muslims who take the Quran seriously, who say, well, this is Allah's word, and He's promised paradise to us if we kill in His name and are killed for His sake, fighting against those who oppose Him, they say, yeah, I'm ready to go on jihad for Allah.
So then we're seeing a God that is a vengeful God, a God that engages an army for His own cause. And yet we're saying he's a religion of peace. I mean, the two really don't match in my mind. What about? I mean, there are so many things that we can talk about. It is 15 minutes is not enough really, because we're just touching on the surface. But if this is the true identity of a Muslim, then it appears to me that when we're welcoming in the U.S. or in Italy, it's almost like welcoming a Trojan horse, because their intentions are not that peaceful, even though on the surface everybody's saying, "Oh yes, he's a peaceful religion." So are we stupid in doing that? I mean, what are we doing?
Stupid, possibly. Ignorant, for sure.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a willful ignorance, a willful blindness. Other times it's just ignorance, not knowing the central teachings of Islam, and believing our leaders who don't know what Islam really is, but who have swallowed the Kool-Aid, saying, yeah, Islam is a religion of peace. Muslims are just like the rest of us. Since Islam is an Abrahamic religion, Muslims must be just like Jews and Christians in what they believe. But the reality is so far from that. Yet most people, they don't know that, or if they know it, they're hiding it for some ulterior reason.
What we were talking a little bit yesterday about the cross line between politics and Islam, and a particular agenda that can be an anti-Christian agenda. Explain a little more. Why would the left be interested in welcoming that kind of a train of thought, knowing that ultimately it can really damage, obviously the U.S., because we're talking about the U.S.
Yeah. Well, like we were talking about, the practices that are inherent to Islam are antithetical to the left's moral values. For instance, it's very strong on women's rights, very strong on alternate sexuality, gay rights, now trans rights, and so on. And yet the reality is, in the Muslim world, women's rights are abrogated, and homosexuals are put to death, and any other alternate kind of sexuality is hunted down, or at least folks who are in those camps are mistreated tremendously. And yet the left knows that, because you can just look at Afghanistan, for instance, most recently, or you can look at any of the other countries that run under Shariah law, and you see how homosexuals are executed, how women are kept in the house, out of sight, not allowed to be educated, and so on. And yet the left in the West wants to welcome Muslims in. The only reason I can see is that they say, for us, for those who are in the West and on the liberal left, we want to see Christianity and traditional Christian values excised from our country or from the Western world. And
Why would be that? Why do you think that would be their agenda? Why do you want to excise Christianity?
Well, they have a worldview that doesn't give place to God, and doesn't want to be under the rubric of any higher authority. Human beings become their own authority, and I think that's. This is a different topic, but I think that's what's behind this gender fluidity movement that says, okay, no, we don't have two genders, we don't have male and female, even though biologically that's a given.
Sure.
Because that would mean it's a given by creation, it's a given by God. Instead, they say, no, we're creating our own gender identities, and so now we have choice. 56 or however many. We choose, we make up our own identity, we become our own gods. So they don't want Christian values, because Christian values say, here's something objective, a standard that we all have to live under. They say, no, we don't want that, so we want to get rid of that. And they say, well, of course, Muslims have the same kind of moral standards that are biblical, at least to some degree. They are very firm in their saying that there is absolute right and absolute wrong. And yet the liberals in the West say, oh yeah, come on in, we want you here. Why? Well, they say Christianity is our enemy. We know that Christianity is also Islam's enemy, major enemy. So our thought is the enemy of our enemy is our friend. So we'll invite the Muslims in. We'll see if we can get the Christians completely sublimated or excised from the West, and then we'll recognize that Islam is an enemy of ours, and then we'll deal with them. But right now, we want them as on our side to help fight against the Christians.
That's a scary thought. I mean, don't you think that they should evaluate the cost of the alliance? You're saying, okay, I want this alliance because we have a common enemy in the Christian movement, if you wish. But all of a sudden, you're in bed with the devil, and you think you can deal with it later. Doesn't make too much sense. I mean, don't you think that they're kind of calculating that risk and saying, oh, hey, we might be taken over by them.
Yeah.
We invited them as partners, but then they're going to have preeminence over us at some point. You think they're evaluating that, or they're just
No, I don't think so. I think they think in terms of a short-term solution. we'll ally with them, and then when we accomplish this goal of getting rid of Christian influence, then we'll turn and deal with the reality of Islam in our midst. But they don't really have much of an understanding of what Islam really is all about.
Unbelievable.
And Peppo, this isn't just my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, you
Yeah.
can just Google the phrase red-green axis. Red for the liberal communistic kind of approach, green for Islam, red-green axis. And there are a lot of people who are seeing this movement of the left welcoming the Muslim world into the West.
I mean, everybody in the U.S. should be screaming and saying, "Oh, guys, let's get on the alert. You know, this is the agenda. Let's be careful." And why isn't that happening? They think is conspiracy theory, or they think is...
Well, there's so much division in our country that neither the left nor the right really is listening to the other. So when the other speaks, you know, you just turn off your hearing because you think, well, they don't know what they're talking about. We have our agenda. We know it's the right way to go, and so we're just going to press on.
And do you think that the Muslim can prey on that? You know, seeing that division, so, you know, this is our moment.
Absolutely. The Muslims are primed to look for weakness because their whole religion is based on power, strength, and either having it themselves or figuring out how to get it. So they're very easily able as a community to look for where the weaknesses are in their opposition and then to exploit that weakness.
So in my mind, that is a recipe for disaster, because you have Christians on one side saying, "Oh, love your enemies." Those guys are saying, "Oh, pray on your enemy."
Not pray for, but pray.
No, praying as in, you know, destroy him, especially when you see the weakness. You know, so somebody that is willing to forgive you is the weakest of all, right? Do you see a solution? Do you see, I mean, in your mind, how can we continue to coexist, finding an equilibrium when their agenda is so focused and we want to be careful not to infringe on anybody's rights, to offend anybody? In your mind, is there a solution, or you think that is part of the divine plan, to the point that there will be a final collusion and we will be at the beginning of the birth pains?
Well, it's hugely problematic for democracies to live side by side with Islam. Islam is not interested in freedoms, in democracy. They talk about the possibility of democracy. They say, look at Turkey has a parliament and so on. But Turkey, if you look at how Turkey is now, it's actually moving away from the freedoms that were first originated under Ataturk back in the late 1920s, early 1930s. And under Erdogan, the present president, things are moving back towards an authoritarianism. So Islam and democracy do not go hand in hand. So we're a country that says we welcome immigrants, but when you have an immigrant who comes in with a worldview that says my first allegiance is to Allah, not to my new country, not to the laws of my country, but to the laws of Allah, and my goal is to see that every country, every human being should come under submission to Allah. My goal is to see America become a Muslim nation. Well, you have the seeds of insurrection and the overthrowing of our present government, our present constitution. So how can we be a country that is open to immigrants, but at the same time say, well, no, you're the kind of immigrant that we can't have come in? And how do you vet that? Because a Muslim who knows how he would come across if he were completely honest, can easily hide what he believes.
I think I heard somewhere, you're making some good points. When I came to the U.S. and I became a U.S. citizen, I had to, swear, that allegiance to this new country first.
Right.
And my swearing meant something. I don't think that for the Muslim that swearing means anything, because as you said, first is Allah, right? So when push comes to shove, if it's Sharia law versus the American laws, Sharia will prevail, I assume, correct?
Yeah, if you are an active practicing Muslim, the difficulty, the big gray area is that there are a lot of people who call themselves Muslims in this country who are very Americanized and who want to live under American law. And they would say, yeah, I'm a Muslim, but they're saying that much like some people in the church who go to, who maybe go to church Christmas and Easter, but don't have anything to do with the church or with God the rest of the year. They say, yeah, I'm a Christian. So you have a lot of people with very low commitment level. They're not interested in practicing jihad. They don't want to overthrow the country, but they claim to be Muslim. So you have that on one end of the spectrum, and then on the other end of the spectrum you have people like Osama bin Laden and others who say our goal, the calling of every Muslim is to take up arms against the infidel and to destroy them for the sake of the advance of the kingdom of Allah.
Aren't they justified in lying for the sake of the furthering of their kingdom?
Yeah, furthering of Islam.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a principle called taqiyya, which originally was a principle that the Shiites, the minority Muslims, developed as they were being persecuted by the majority Muslims, the Sunnis. And the doctrine of taqiyya said it's perfectly fine to lie if your person is under threat, or your family, or because of you being Shia rather than Sunni, or Shia Islam is under threat by the Sunnis. You can lie and pretend that you're Sunni, so that you can avoid that threat. There's actually some rationale in the Quran itself that Sunnis also take as a justification for being able to lie to your enemy in order to be able to advance your cause, advance the cause of Islam. So, when it comes to being vetted as an immigrant, if your goal is to get into this country in order to help undermine the country, then of course you're going to come face the vetting process, and you're going to try to do your best to present a face that is benign, so that you'll get into the country easily. That's why it's so difficult to
and get them into government too. I mean, that's the other scary part. That advancement, and you think you're going to get a point of no return. I mean, if you continue this way, I think that the needle is going to be tilted too much on one side.
Yeah, and the Muslim theological world speaks of jihad in various capacities. So it's not just jihad of the sword or physical warfare. There's a jihad of immigration as well, which Muhammad talked about, moving into new territory, moving Muslims into new territory to build up a large enough core group to be able then to influence that non-Muslim world. And so we see all of the immigration that's been going on in Europe, for instance, Muslims moving there. Many legitimately, they're moving because they want a better life for themselves and their families, but there are others who are going with jihad in mind, the jihad of numbers, immigration, and then of a much greater reproduction rate than the country around them, the natives, so that they think of jihad by population. They're going to conquer without having to fire a shot or swing a sword, just by having a majority of people there.
Yeah, I think in Italy we have a negative growth. We are at 1.7, 1.8. I haven't looked at the latest statistics, and I think you need 2.2 in order to preserve the ethnicity of the populace. And those Muslim counting, they have 5-6 kids, at a time. So that is a scary thought. What in your mind, I mean, what can be done? Because the average person doesn't even think about the repercussion of bringing people in and continuing to bring people in, and probably honestly they feel, what can I do to prevent that? Nothing. Is voting maybe one means to correct this? Is expressing that to your representative another mean to say, hey, let's slow down? What would be your suggestion?
Well, I'm no expert when it comes to politics,
just
but I think we have to speak up. For instance, I mean we have taken out of Afghanistan roughly 120,000 Afghan people. So far, out of that 120,000, at least half have been brought into the United States. The others are still in holding camps in other parts of the world. And we're told that they've been vetted, but that's just, for me, it's impossible to believe, because there's very little resources within Afghanistan in terms of documentation to be able to vet a lot of people.
That's right.
And things happen so quickly that it's not possible to have had in-depth interviews with all these people.
And plus, we said that they are actually probably not having any qualms in lying in the first place. So, you know, how can you vet somebody that will even like you? You know, one side you don't have the documentation, on the other one you might even have some false documentation.
Yeah, and I mean, the original idea was that we were going to get out from Afghanistan those who had helped us, had helped the Americans and the Allied troops and the various ambassadors and so on in Afghanistan. So we said, they've allied with us, so they'll be targets of the Taliban when the Taliban come in, so we want to get them out. Well, in fact, out of the 120,000 or so, what I've read is that maybe 5,000 or so actually were these special immigrant visa holders or people who had been translators for the American or other Allied troops. About 5,000, so that leaves 115,000 Afghans who are not part of that group, and we left behind so many who were part of the group who now are being targeted by the Taliban. But of the 115,000 that have been brought out of Afghanistan and the 60,000 that are already in the U.S., they, as far as we know, didn't have any special relationship with the U.S. Many were fleeing to try to save their own lives. They don't want to live under the Taliban, but there could be others who are who've aligned themselves with ISIS-K or with the Taliban or with Al-Qaeda, and they see this as an opportunity to plug themselves into the United States secretively, you know, along with the masses. So we have no way of knowing. My worry is that in the coming 6 months to a year, as if there are operatives who come into the U.S. Through our blind vetting process, that we're going to see terror attacks starting to pop up all around the United States. There's no question we need to fix a broken immigration system, and we need to have people who understand what Islam is all about and who are able to ask very pointed questions and are able to dig into the past histories of people who are presenting themselves as potential citizens or immigrants to the country.
So again, on a personal, switching gear for a second, on a personal side, your father was Muslim.
Yeah.
Did that create then some animosity between you two since you didn't embrace the same belief?
It did when I became a Christian. You know, prior to becoming a Christian, I was doing my searching, as you mentioned, and I went into Eastern mysticism and practiced that for 6 years. And during that time, my dad had no problems at all with what I was doing. But the moment I became a Christian, then suddenly that was unacceptable. And he kicked me out of the family over that.
Meaning he disowned you, Asher? Wow.
He did. He told me there were 4 things in our clash before he cut me off completely that he said, and 3 of them had to do with the issue of being a Christian versus a Muslim and the impact it would have on family. He told me if I felt the same way when I was next to come home, which would have been the next summer, he said, you'll have to find someplace else to live. You won't be welcome under my roof. He told me that he was a senior vice president for Aramco Oil Company, biggest oil company, crude oil company in the world. He said his division was government affairs, so he worked with Saudi oil, government officials. He said if they find out one of my sons has become a Christian, they'll lose all respect for me. I won't be able to work with them. I'll be ineffective, and so I'll have to resign or I'll be fired from my position. And then the last thing he said to me is he said, it doesn't matter what you say about what you believe. According to Islamic law, Sharia law, you're a Muslim, because the son of a Muslim is automatically a Muslim. So he said, so if the Saudis hear rumors about you being a Christian and they pick you up for questioning, what will you say? I said, well, I'll be honest. I said, I understand it's a sensitive matter, and I'll be cautious in how I respond. He said, well, what if they ask you directly, are you a Christian? Are you a follower of Jesus? What will you say? I said, well, I'll say yes, because I am, and I can't go back on that. And I can still picture, he threw his hands up in the air and he said, well, and out of your own mouth you'll have condemned yourself of the crime of apostasy.
Wow.
And he said, you should know that in Saudi Arabia, the penalty for apostasy is death by beheading. So he said, that's something you should consider.
Wow.
So I was 20 years old. I'd been a Christian then 3 months.
Unbelievable.
And God was so faithful. The Holy Spirit was very gracious to me. And I thought, it's not very likely. I'm an American citizen living in Saudi Arabia. The worst they probably would do is just throw me in jail for a little while and then deport me, but not behead me. But you never know when you're 20 years old.
Yeah.
So, but those were some of the last words that he said to me.
Did you reconcile with him afterwards, or that was it?
We did. We had a reconciliation. So this was in 1975. In 1989, my younger sister was getting married. My parents were now back in the U.S. The wedding was going to be in Washington, D.C. She wanted Cindy and me and our oldest at the time, who was 5 years old, to come, our 5-year-old to be a flower girl for the wedding. And so she asked my father, won't you please let them come? And so he relented. And it was during that time I took a week time off, and in that time period we had a major breakthrough where he was able to embrace me again as his son, even though in that time period in between he would not communicate with me.
Now, would you say that he was a very committed Muslim,
No.
or was he one of those that you say just by a nominal
Muslim? Yeah, by tradition.
Yeah.
So he was a cultural Muslim by the time I'd become a Christian. But I mean, that just shows you the power of the belief system of Islam. That even as a nominal Muslim, he said it's not permissible for you to become a Christian. You'll put your family in danger. You caused me. He didn't quite say it this way, but caused him personal embarrassment among his family and among Muslims who knew him. For a son to leave Islam to become a Christian. So it was a great matter of shame for him personally.
Now, I read, still, among, talking about this particular issue, I've seen cases where fathers actually killed their own kids because of conversion. Does Islam justify even?
Yes. It's called honor killings. And it can be actually in Shariah. There are 4 different schools in Sunni Islam. There are 4 different schools of law, which vary. Some people say, I've never studied because it's so voluminous, but they say in about 80+% of all legal issues, the 4 schools are in agreement. And then they have minor variations on the other 20%. But all of them agree that those who are apostates, who leave Islam, deserve to be killed. Some of the schools say they must be killed. Others say they deserve to be killed, and of course in the afterlife, Allah will treat them with the worst of all tortures. But this one particular manual of Islamic law that I have a copy of here in the house says that parents and grandparents have the right to take the life of their child or grandchild if that individual has done something so serious as to leave the
Apostate.
faith,
Mhm.
apostatize. So, so Islamic law allows for that, and even countries, Muslim countries that aren't operating by Islamic law, if there's an honor killing, they may arrest the person, but instead of trying them for murder, they give them some other charge, and then the person is usually out of jail within a year, or within a few years at maximum. So it's not. So in essence, what the country is saying is, yeah, we don't see this as a serious offense, the killing of another person because they happen to choose a different religion.
It's a righteous crime. Now, I hear it seems like to be a common thread. People that have visions. All these Muslims that have vision of the white man telling them, that he is the truth. Can you explain a little more why that particular vision? For so many of them.
Well, of course, white is the mark of purity, first of all. But the bigger picture of this is that for almost 1,400 years, from the 600s until I'd say the 1970s, Islam was sort of a stone barrier that was almost impenetrable by the gospel. There were many missionaries that had gone, but with very little success. So much so that many missionary agencies dissuaded people from going to the Muslims, because they said it's just a waste of resources. Let's go to other people. But from the 1970s onwards, it seems like the Holy Spirit said, okay, this frontier, which has been closed for so long, I'm now going to open. And the hearts of Muslims changed, many Muslims, from being closed off to now being hungry, hopeful, searching. And so we see, even though the church was slow to pick up on this and to send missionaries, nonetheless, the Holy Spirit was stirring in the hearts of people through dreams, visions, healings in the name of Jesus, so that Muslims have started to come to Christ in much larger numbers. And now it's like the floodgates are opening, certainly compared to the first 1,400 years, and even up, in the 1970s. And there are a number of factors. The biggest one is, I think, the softening of hearts by the Holy Spirit, but also you have the internet and social media. For all the problems of those technologies, you have now people who, even though they're dissuaded by their authorities, their imams, from asking questions or doing research, they now, in the privacy of their own home, they can go online. They can ask questions on their phones. They can contact friends and say, "Hey, I'm a Muslim, but I've got questions. Are you a Christian? What do you really believe about Jesus?" And they can hear from the horse's mouth, as it were, what we actually believe, rather than what their masters tell them Christians actually believe. So there's tremendous access now to objective truth for Muslims, where they didn't have that up until the internet.
Yesterday we were talking about some YouTube channels where people are talking about Islam, and you said that nobody's addressing the issue. Okay, if I leave Islam, then where do I go from there, right? And you have a different approach, because there is hope in Jesus Christ. So the alternative is, yes, leave this lie to find the truth, in a sense. Are you working on a channel? Are you preparing something? What's happening in
thanks.
short term?
Thanks for asking. Well, I hope to start to do videos that will bring a comparison and a contrast between who Muhammad is and the view that he projected to the world to say, follow this vision, and on the other hand, who Jesus is and the vision that he projected, saying, follow this direction, because the differences are so overwhelming. And if a person is really a seeker after truth, then I believe wholeheartedly, implicitly, that a person who's a seeker after truth will see in Jesus the truth, and will see the caricature, the falsehood that is in Muhammad, even though so many people put him up as the paragon of virtue to be emulated.
So if someone wants to know more in-depth information, how do they find you? Because you don't have a channel right now.
Right.
You mentioned that you have a blog, right?
I have a blog.
What is this blog?
It's the address is my name, Mateen Elass.
How do you spell it?
MATEENELASS is one word. .wordpress is one word. .com.
Okay.
Or they can just Google my name and the word blog, and it will take them to my blog site.
Okay. Can they leave comments on those blogs, or?
Yeah, you can read any blog and leave a comment.
Okay.
I've got 2 books on the subject of Islam.
Okay. Great.
One called Understanding the Quran, a quick Christian guide to the Muslim holy book, and the second called The Teachings of Jesus and Muhammad, putting side by side 60 different questions.
And
that
those
Muhammad
can be
and
found
Jesus-
on Amazon.
You can
or-
find them on Amazon. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Thanks. Well, it's been fun. I mean, at least for me, has been very informative, and I hope that you have gleaned a little glimpse, actually, because we're just at the top of the iceberg, I believe, with this. But
Yes.
if you want more information, you know where to find it. And thank you again. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And,
It's great to have you in our home.
I catch you guys next week. Ciao.